Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast. What a miscalculation. Trump convicted. I plan to return to my current series, The Things We Live For, after my special edition Memorial Day piece, and I'm still determined to go with that plan. But given the historic situation happening in real time this week, I've delayed those remaining articles one more week in order to gather the facts of the current situation together and help those trying to sort out what is going on to make sense of where we are and what to expect next, all in one clear, straightforward article. I can't believe that I am being put in a position of defending Donald Trump. I resent it a little bit. But I'm far from the only one being put in that exact position. A big miscalculation is being made right now. A widespread and impenetrable blindness to the fact that most people now feel that they too are in a position where their consciences or their sense of justice and fair play demand that they defend Donald Trump. Like it or not. Otherwise, it could be their own freedoms threatened next. Forget whether they're right or wrong to feel that way. The point is, that is the way they are feeling. And it's decisions on the left that are creating those feelings. Far from turning public opinion against Trump, as the media and the far left desperately hope to, this is likely to backfire in a spike of support for Donald Trump. Dennis Quaid would be Exhibit A for this. Having publicly campaigned, fundraised for Barack Obama earlier this week, he publicly said that he was probably going to vote for Trump. He didn't secretly plan to do this clandestine and ashamed while lying to his Hollywood friends about his political allegiances. He told the whole world. That's what's being created here. When asked why, the first reason he gave was the blatant injustice of these prosecutions, a weaponizing of the justice system that he feared. If these never-before-seen tactics were allowed to determine the outcome of the next election, our free democracy, at least at the level that we have heretofore experienced, would be greatly at risk and maybe even permanently damaged and reduced. He's not alone in those concerns. Concerns being created by the left to their own detriment. People don't trust you. Another example. I don't agree with RFK Jr. on most things. But when he was asked, as Democrat royalty, to condemn Donald Trump as a threat to democracy, he countered that one could easily make the argument that Biden was an even bigger threat. Again, he's not alone in being made to feel that way, whether you think he should feel that way or not. I have said publicly that I did not vote for Trump in either of the last two elections. And unlike many of his supporters, I still don't like him as a person. Personally, I don't look for entertainment in my politicians. I like them boring and competent. The less I have to worry about or even think about them, the better. I want serious people in our serious positions. I don't get any childish kick out of Trump's insane tweets or offensive behavior. I don't subscribe to the philosophy that he is a deeply moral man motivated wholly or even primarily by a bone-deep patriotism. I think Donald Trump is motivated by Donald Trump. And I think he knows who his audience is and says what they want to hear. A look at his private life clearly shows that he is far from a virtuous saint. And his quirky personality traits, like an utter lack of impulse control and giving everybody who doesn't unconditionally worship him annoying nicknames, is infantile to a ridiculous degree. I don't even have the high hopes that most of his followers do that he will do amazing things to restore the country during a second term. I support most of the policies, if not his behavior, during his first term, but he left a lot of promises unfulfilled. Whether that had more to do with a lack of know-how about the system, being blocked by the, quote, swamp, or a lack of real commitment to these things, the point is, why should I believe it will be any different during a second term where all of those issues will still be issues? Now that I've enraged the right, it's the left's turn. At this point, I will vote for anyone before Biden. If Trump ends up as my only other option, then yes, that includes Donald Trump. I'm not scared off by the empty and oft-repeated threats that if voted in, he will never leave power. Because he did before, and no Marines had to be sent to invade the White House and pistol whip him to make it happen. Even if he tried to stay, and there's no reason to think he would, it's not like Congress, the police, the military, or the country would just go along with it. Just say, oh, he doesn't want to leave, so I guess there's nothing anyone can do. Oh well, it was a good run, America. And he knows that. Whatever else Trump may be, he did not get to where he is by being stupid. No matter how many Robert De Niros you try to scare people with, using the same tired, he's Hitler reborn line, the polls show it clearly isn't working. Literally, no one believes you, including you. By the way, could we at least pick a new historical figure, just to mix it up a little? Hitler is getting pretty monotonous, especially with so many better examples of him on our college campuses. Could we throw in a Mao or a Lenin or a Pol Pot once in a while? Or even a Saddam Hussein, that might be fun. Plus, the broken Hitler record media has some major credibility issues here, which they better face up to if they want to salvage anything that's left. Each time they run a hatchet job of editing tricks, the truth comes out, and soon. They just lose more credibility. They have none left at this point, and they still insist on going further into the red, to their own detriment. It is suicidal, but they're determined, so it's a lost cause. He said there were fine people on both sides in Charlottesville. And in the very next breath, he said that didn't include the white supremacist. He said that if he was reelected, he'd be a dictator for a day. First of all, that too scares no one. And second, he also specified that he would be dictator for the first day when it came to doing two things: immediately closing the border and, quote, drill baby drill. Agendas that the American people widely support being put into immediate action. He threatened that if he wasn't elected, it would be a bloodbath. He predicted that if he wasn't elected, it would be an economic bloodbath for the automobile industry, hardly interchangeable in meaning. He said immigrants were vermin, the language that Hitler used. He said that cartels who traffic in human beings were vermin, and I know of no one who disagrees with that. He referred to his MAGA movement in terms of a united Third Reich. He reposted a commercial that someone else made using a stock background of famous newspaper headlines, one of which, if zoomed into tightly, bears an almost illegible headline about Hitler's notorious Reich. Nazi Germany often made notorious but historic headlines. By the way, admitting that you go over these things with a microscope doesn't make him look like the abnormal one. Then, of course, he led an insurrection to overturn democracy. I really resent having to argue this one, since I took a lot of flack in the Bible Belt for unapologetically condemning January 6th. But fine, let's go there. If it was a serious attempt at an insurrection to permanently overthrow democracy, it was the first unarmed one in history. And it was equally stupid of him to use Midwest grannies to lead said insurrection, who stayed between the velvet ropes during this, quote, dangerous attempt to end democracy for all time. It was a protest that clearly became a riot, and the behavior of many people involved in that riot was appalling. But we are all equally as tired of hearing about it via overblown dramatizations as we are tired of hearing about stolen elections from the right. So, now that everyone on both sides hates me, on to the headlines. Trump was convicted on all 34 charges in the New York City trial on Thursday afternoon. The left is deliriously happy. Every news anchor giddily broke the news, and every celebrity took to social media to celebrate. Norm Eisen on the CNN show Aaron Burnett Out Front made an utter spectacle of himself with his wide-eyed, gushing babble. This is a major miscalculation on the part of Democrats. Hey, I could easily be proven wrong in the polls, or people may forget their outrage by November, but you, meaning the left, probably just sealed the deal on Trump's reelection. You do know that, right? So thank yourselves when that day comes. Recent polls from earlier in the week indicated that a conviction would change nothing for most voters. Those who adore Trump will still love him and vote for him, even after being convicted. Those who loathe Trump will still hate him and vote against him, even if he had been acquitted. Among the undecided voters, the ones who will probably decide this election, there were basically equal amounts of people that said a conviction would make them more likely to vote for him, because it would be viewed as unjust, as the number of those who said they would be less likely to vote for him as a convicted felon. So that group was a wash. And even so, they didn't say that a conviction was a deal breaker, only that it would make them more or less likely to vote for him. And it will all be old news by November, given the turnover rate of the news cycle and the public's short attention span. However, Trump's sentence may still be playing out before our eyes during November, and pictures are worth 1,000 words, so that could have a major effect on people's votes. But I seriously doubt that it will be the effect that the left wants. There are basically 4 main options for Trump's sentence, and I can't see how any of them are winning propositions. As a white-collar, first-time offense by a 77-year-old ex-president, one would expect a slap on the wrist in the form of parole or fine/community service. The first option, parole, would basically be admitting that the whole thing was, at best, an unimportant waste of everyone's time and tax dollars, or a miscarriage of justice at the worst. A light sentence would not soothe the now inflamed outrage on the right, or convince the center not to be concerned about the misuse of the justice system. And it would anger the left. But it would also be the sentence most quickly forgotten after a reasonable fine, which is the smart move. Community service is their second best option, as it would not be severe enough to stoke the sense of outrage much further, while providing some entertaining images of Trump in an orange jumpsuit picking up trash on the side of the highway. However much these images would delight the left, they would not be enough to satisfy them out of thinking that Trump had gotten away with something through a sentence like that. And there is still a significant risk that any display of public humiliation may swing everyone else in Trump's favor rather than against him. After all, he is still a former president, and however much one may dislike the man, Americans don't like seeing the office of the presidency sullied, disrespected, or humiliated. Still, it's better than either of the two remaining options from the corner the left has single-mindedly backed themselves into. The third option is house arrest. The public would see Trump not being allowed to travel and campaign, being forced to hold rallies from Mar-a-Lago, and they would see it as election interference and react with a backlash in votes, a "you can't tell me what to do" defiance. And once again, the left will be unsatisfied by the punishment, where Donald Trump is confined to his life of marvelous luxury. In a case that has so many unprecedented milestones, it would be unprecedented to sentence Trump to any jail time. His violations of the gag order, which is mostly viewed as unlawful and tyrannical anyway, and his lack of remorse, which is par for the course for Trump, especially given that he still maintains his innocence, which I strongly doubt when it comes to his moral guilt, but seems to be reasonable as far as his criminal guilt. And after all, courts try crimes, not bad morality. But these two issues could be cited to justify sentencing him to up to 4 years max in jail. This would be an insanely stupid sentence for the left to pass, just from a self-preservation standpoint. It would, like so much of this case, be overturned on appeal. So, all the damage with none of the benefits. Still, I really don't think the left has the self-control or the awareness of the situation to restrain themselves. I laughingly tried to warn the dark side recently that, in the words of Princess Leia, after the White House's ridiculous use of Mark Hamill, the more you tighten your grip, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. But what can I say? Vader isn't listening. Dark Brandon isn't either. Okay then. The Secret Service has been prepping for the possibility of a jail sentence given the deranged circumstances we find ourselves in. They would have to guard Trump 24/7 and keep him separate from the other inmates. They would be armed and test his food, etc. It would be a spectacle for the history books. And though it would delight the left, their glee would be short-lived, I predict, as the levels of their glee would be matched by the degree of backlash from almost everyone else. At that point, I think turnout for voting will set records. If you thought 2016 was all the result of a public desire to give the man the middle finger, wait till you see an election under those circumstances. I predict people will crawl over broken glass to vote for him, including some people who would normally stay home, even if they despise him personally, just to give the powers that be both fingers. I would remind you of the scene where African Americans turned out en masse just to cheer him as he drove by on his way to get his infamous mugshot, talking about him as though he was one of them, someone also being oppressed by the system. Sentencing would normally happen 2 to 3 months from now, but the judge is anxious to get it done. We will find out which of these losing propositions he chooses on July 11th. I will be very surprised if any restraint is shown, given that the last New York judge tried to impose a sentence of $500 million in fines before he could even qualify to appeal, which was overturned. Just saying. And the gleeful anticipation of seizing Trump Towers was not a good look for Democrat politicians. So I suspect this judge will likewise self-destructively go for the max and dole out at least some jail time. But any of the options chosen are a losing proposition. It's just to varying degrees. Having put the cart before the horse and discussed the sentence before the crime, let's cover the charges and the trial itself in the simplest and most straightforward terms possible. In the early 2000s, Trump allegedly had a one-night stand with a mildly successful, mostly unknown porn star named Stormy Daniels. While testifying, she claimed that despite consenting to this encounter, she was asking herself how she got there. I, like everyone else, assumed the same way she gets there every day that she goes into work. A willingness to exchange cash for sex. That is how the porn industry works, right? Trump denies that this night ever happened, but given his Playboy history, very few people believe him. Still, we are talking about crimes here, and disgusting though it may be morally, hiring a prostitute this way isn't illegal. Later, when Trump ran for president, he paid Stormy off through his lawyer. Most out-of-court settlements, even those with corporations, include non-disclosure agreements. This is basically the only reason that companies are willing to make settlements like these in the first place, rather than take their chances and go to court. Hush money payments, likewise, are immoral, but surprisingly, are also not illegal. Alexander Hamilton was exposed for a hush money payment to the husband of his lover who was blackmailing him way back in the dawn of our nation in January of 1792. But he wasn't charged with anything because that wasn't, and still isn't, a crime. The part where it becomes a crime is if it was paid to buy election interference. This idea first requires two presumptions. One, that if people knew about Stormy Daniels, they would not have voted for Trump and he would have lost the election without the hush money. Highly doubtful, given Trump's record with women was already known at the time and didn't change the outcome. After all, he was running against Hillary, whom many people still would have hated. And the sentiment would still be one of doing something radically different to change the status quo. The second presumption, that Donald Trump made the payment not to save himself embarrassment, like all politicians do in hiding the skeletons in their closet, or to keep Melania from finding out and possibly imploding his marriage, or for any other reason except the motive of manipulating the election. Even if you grant the idea that the election would have been lost if this story had come out, which is dubious, proving that the motive for what was going on in Trump's head was election interference is pretty difficult. And yet this is the key to the difference between a crime versus an immoral private decision. Even if there was a crime, who has jurisdiction over it? Influencing or interfering with an election is a federal crime, not one an individual state can prosecute. And the federal government already investigated this very case and didn't press charges, ruling that there was no evidence of anything illegal about what happened. So how did we get here? When Trump's lawyer paid Stormy Daniels off, Trump reimbursed him and marked it down as a legal expense, since the payment went to his lawyer. The DA of Manhattan claims this was mislabeling it and therefore, quote, falsifying business records, which is criminal. This is debatable just on the merits that the money was, in fact, paid to his lawyer, so it was a legal expense, at least arguably. The problem is that the charge of falsifying business records is a misdemeanor, and one past the date of the statute of limitations. So the charges needed to be elevated to a felony in order to be prosecutable. There was only one way to do that: an unprecedented game of legal leapfrog. You've heard of felony murder? If a group commits a felony together, say armed robbery, and during that felony robbery a person is killed, all of the participants in that felony are guilty of the murder, not just the person who pulled the trigger, because their mutual participation in the felony is what caused the murder to happen. That idea was copied and pasted onto this case. They argued that the hush money payment was a cover-up of a previous crime and therefore illegal and a felony. What was the previous felony that was covered up with the hush money? They don't know, and they really hope you won't ask. The best they could do was offer a bring your own charges option for the jury during closing arguments, a potluck dinner of criminal charges. Even if you assume that the 2016 election would have ended differently without this hush money payment, and even if you also assume that this was indeed Trump's motive in paying it, you also have to assume that in some way this all covered up some other undefined felony in order to make any of this illegal. Now you've leapfrogged your way to the start of this trial. A trial that proved, quote, no man is above the law, as Biden declared. Except, of course, for Biden, when his senility was deemed to be the reason to not prosecute him for mishandling classified documents, which he did, according to that investigation. And, of course, for Hunter's charges, too. But let's not even go there. So, whose brilliant legal theory was this? Manhattan's District Attorney Alvin Braggs Jr., who ran on a campaign promise to get Trump for something. Anything. So at least he keeps his word. Unfortunately, it's the word of a show me the man and I'll show you the crime third world dictator's kangaroo court mentality. It so doesn't make you look good to support this, Democrats. And this is the same DA who wouldn't prosecute Hillary for destroying evidence of her mishandling of classified information by bleaching her hard drive, because she did it while running for president. And to prosecute someone for what they did in the course of campaigning would be election interference. Oh, the irony. He also refused to prosecute Hillary for falsifying records that showed she deliberately spread the Russiagate myth to influence the election, thereby admitting she did it by fining her for it, but not prosecuting her further. So many glass houses in D.C. But even if the DA is willing to pursue a name-making vendetta at the expense of his duty and oath of office to pursue the law and justice over conviction rates, what judge on earth would even hear a case like this or allow it? Judge Juan Merkin, who likewise has a history of strong feelings regarding a desire to see Trump prosecuted by any means, and who has an uncanny record for being randomly selected to oversee Trump-related cases. He made many unprecedented decisions to keep this trial from derailing into dismissal, and in so doing opened himself up to the humiliation of being overturned later on. So many potential causes for reversible error. But he obviously knows that and made these choices in order to get a temporary conviction. These unheard of reversible error decisions include letting Stormy testify, which could be deemed prejudicial for the jury, given that she could only testify about the one-night stand and nothing about the crime itself, i.e. Trump's motives in paying her and the falsifying of business records, which she knew nothing about. Up through the testimony of Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, who made the hush money payment, and who accidentally admitted on the stand to personally committing a far more serious crime than the one Trump was being tried for, and to only testifying with the motive of getting, quote, revenge on Trump. In those words, the transcript reads, question, now, you also testified on Thursday that you were mad at President Trump. You blamed him, at least in part, for what happened to you, correct? Answer, that's correct. Question, you said, and we played it for the jury, that revenge against President Trump is a dish that is, answer, served best cold. Question, best served cold, correct? Answer, correct. Question, and you meant it when you said it then, correct? You meant it when you said it then? Answer, yes, sir. Question, and you meant it when you said it now? Answer, yes, sir. All the way up to the most recent reversible error, the jury instructions. The jury was told that they could disagree about which felony was committed and covered up. As long as they agreed there was one, they must still convict, which every legal authority I've listened to says has never been allowed in our entire legal history. And it's not hard to understand why. If someone committed a murder during a felony, as we discussed earlier, and we were on the jury together, and you and 3 other jurors thought that the murder had been part of a felony robbery, while I and 3 other jurors believed that the murder had happened during a felony assault like domestic abuse, and a third group of the remaining 4 jurors thought that the murder had happened as part of felony tax evasion, and the judge told us we could disagree about which felony had been committed, but should convict if some nebulous crime made up of the mix of our options without having any consensus on even one of those possibilities. That is what just happened. Insane, right? So the last piece, the jury. How does a jury convict in a case this wild? New York City is by the polls and voting records very anti-Trump. Most people there are of the same group as the media who wants to see Trump convicted of something, anything. The media cites the number of cases brought against Trump in so many states and on so many levels of jurisdictions as proof that he must have done something illegal to be charged with so many things. But the public perception, at least, is that charging a former president, something that has never happened before, who is also the current leading candidate in the race for the White House, and a political opponent to the sitting president, which has never happened before, all these countless charges come off as throwing spaghetti at the wall in the hope that something sticks. It looks like injustice, not proof of guilt. As part of the group that is willing to destroy everything they claim to fear Trump will destroy, in order to stop him, a fair trial in New York was never going to happen. Jurors were eliminated right and left, and still the jury contained, for example, a woman who was openly hostile in comments about her preconceived ideas regarding Trump, but who thought she could still be impartial, and 2 lawyers who would normally have been vetoed by both prosecution and defense as potential complications for their cases. One has to assume that either all the vetoes had already been used up, or there were only worse options available when it came to replacing them. The jury also faced enormous pressure from neighboring New Yorkers to convict, which was the reason most of them cited to be excused, an inability to be impartial. And with confusing and erroneous jury instructions from the judge, like the one cited here and more, one can only blame the jury's verdict on the jury itself so much. During closing arguments, the jury was briefly given 3 choices for their options of the previous crime that was covered up. This would be during closing arguments, so no testimony or evidence after this point to prove any of these 3 theories. The crime was unlawful means to promote a candidate for office. But what unlawful means? Hiding a one-night stand isn't unlawful. Here are the 3 possibilities. 1, that the unlawful act was that Trump's lawyer overpaid his taxes. No, I know it sounds like a joke or a wild spin, but I swear that's the charge. On his taxes, Trump claimed the money he paid to his lawyer as a compensation instead of as a reimbursement. And thus, the lawyer paid taxes on it, since compensations count as income and reimbursements don't. One of the secondary prosecutors claimed in his closing arguments, quote, "It's true that the result of this improper accounting is that taxes would have to be paid that weren't owed. You don't have to pay taxes on a reimbursement, so the result of reporting them as income tax is more taxes are getting paid than are owed. But as the judge will tell you, it's a crime to prepare false tax documents regardless, even when doing so does not result in the underpayment of taxes." I have no words. The other 2 options were 2, covering up violations of campaign finance laws, or 3, covering up violations of business record laws. Wait, the cover-up was of the cover-up? So as Tablet Magazine correctly translated, Trump falsified business records to conspire to steal the election by falsifying the business records. Ah, the glories of circular reasoning. Further proof that the Ivy Leagues aren't what they used to be. That's the case in a nutshell. Nope, I'm sorry. That insanity is actually it. Nothing more than that. A DA who ran on a promise to get Trump. He leapfrogged from if the hush money was paid, that altered the election, to altering the election was the only possible motive to pay the hush money, to the payment was falsified in records, which makes this a crime, to this was done to cover up some unknown previous crime, which brings it back within the statute of limitations, to the previous crime that was covered up was the cover-up, the one we've been talking about all along. This was overseen by a judge with a known dislike of Trump, who allowed all this legal gymnastics and ignored jurisdiction issues, election fraud being under federal jurisdiction, which had already shot down this case. Then he made a pile of unprecedented reversible errors to secure a temporary conviction. The possible sentences are parole, community service, house arrest, or up to 4 years in jail. And the media rejoices because they're too stupid to see how bad this is for them. As Andrew Weissman discussed his self-described man crush on the best judge in the whole wide world on MSNBC, as though any of this biased fawning qualified as journalism, the rest of the media speculated with Norm Eisen's deranged, wide-eyed, triumphant glow about how jail time wouldn't be unprecedented for a first-time offense. Not true, especially in New York, where many violent assaults have been downgraded to misdemeanors, and no bail is required for many crimes. They are in such an impenetrable echo chamber that they are blind to the dangers. Unpleasant as it may be for them, if they had to present and work with at least a few people with opposing views, they might have some idea of the feelings that are forming in the real world right now. There are 3 dangers in my way of thinking. 1, backlash. 2, precedent. And 3, election denial. I think this will all backfire against the Democrats in a major way, and to a never-before-seen degree, depending on the sentence. There is no outcome I can see where the perceived injustices of this doesn't cost the left. The sentence will determine how much, and its visibility will determine how much people are still thinking about it on Election Day. Though I'm a totally fallible human being, just like everyone else, I just don't see how any of the outcomes could in any way be good for them. People are more scared of the abuses of power that they've seen on the left than they are about any threatened but unrealized abuses of power the media tries to get them to fear Trump might take from them. And that's a fact. Especially when they haven't even been skillful in covering up the injustices they're trying to commit. They could have at least done something that would have sounded legal to anyone who wasn't a lawyer. Plus, they don't even bother covering up having their dirty fingers in every pie. Biden sent his senior Justice Department official Matthew Coangelo to Bragg's office to join him as a lead attorney in prosecuting this case. That looks dirty. And that's after Fani Willis's co-prosecutor and married lover Nathan Wade's financial records came out, showing his coordination with the White House during that prosecution. The precedent being set right now is dangerous. Once Pandora's box is opened, you can't close it when it's your turn. Once the egg is scrambled, it can't be unscrambled. Trying to take opponents off of ballots, prosecutions of the opposing party by the one wielding power, frivolous impeachments, these things cut both ways. Democrats think we've reached the end of history and they will always be in power from here on out. But for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The right, the middle, and even the moderate left thinks that the far left has lost its mind. And what was mere disgust and eye-rolling annoyance is building into a full-fledged backlash. There are just too many fronts of insanity to ignore, which is what they usually do. The border, the economy, foreign wars, exploding crime stats, drag queen story hours in kindergartens, trans athletes in women's sports and locker rooms, college campus protesters in favor of baby-killing genocidal terrorists. You've driven people to the breaking point. You are going to lose power for a while because of it. You got drunk on power and lost touch with everyone who doesn't think exactly like you. And you think you can push everyone around on every front, non-stop, and you'll get to keep going on unchecked. The only question left is, will you cause a swing back to a moderate sanity or a full swing into firm authoritarianism? Either way, someone other than you is about to have power, and you've created some very dangerous rules to this game with your own blind and out-of-touch, giddy, drunken nonsense. The last consequence is election denial. Al Gore was the first to end the good old days when elections ended on election day in favor of endlessly recounting hanging chads. Hillary was the first to deny election results and declare that the sitting president was an invalid one. Trump has been the loudest and the most unrelenting in claims that the election was stolen and invalid. And unbelievably, they just made it worse. If Trump miraculously isn't elected in November, unlikely, and they get a 4-year reprieve before the backlash happens, which I think is practically an impossibility, then there is no way that the results are not interpreted as the outcome of Trump being unable to campaign, and or the impact to voters' thinking from charges that will be invalidated in the long run through appeals, both of which are going to be viewed, right or wrong, as blatant election interference. Americans, like all people, are subject to influences, even manipulations, but try to openly control them, force them, make them believe that you've taken their choices away and things will become more unbelievably ugly than any of us want them to. Unlike the warmongers on the internet, I don't believe we are anywhere close to a civil war, no matter what the outcome of the election is. My rule of thumb is, if the person saying civil war is coming sounds excited about it, they're a nerd who enjoys role-playing games too much. And if they are trying to magnify your feelings of panic, they're a charlatan preying on your fears. As a rule, I only pay attention to calm, neutral arguments, not appeals to emotions. But come November, if half the nation truly believes not just that they lost and better luck next time, but that the justice system was weaponized to interfere with the election of the only alternative to one of the worst presidents in our history, one who is senile and likely won't live all the way through another term, one whose VP isn't even liked by anyone on either side, much less respected or thought at all capable. And they openly, publicly control the outcome of the election, as it will be viewed, to secure a win for a candidate that people are deeply unhappy with, who can't seemingly win otherwise. If that's what half the nation believes happened come November, there is going to be chaos. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that at least it's peaceful. But they've blindly unleashed one of two things in their hyper-focused determination to bring down Trump: a radical backlash of votes or widespread chaos. So stop celebrating and go to work on damage control, on fixing what you just broke, for your own sake as much as for everyone else's. And don't say you weren't warned that the outcome would be far from what you wanted it to be. The age of defining oneself by your commitment to a political party is coming to an end. Neither side is going to be able to ride a tide of loyalty to gain power for much longer, especially the left. More and more people are thinking of themselves as independents, who may lean one way or the other, but who don't owe either party a damned thing, certainly not habituated allegiance. These voters expect their votes to be earned by representatives who hear them instead of preach at them, and who deliver results. So, as Forrest Gump would say, and that's all I've got to say about that. Thank you for listening. I look forward to speaking to you next week.